Hey, welcome to the Deeper Bible Podcast. We're a show about digging deep into the beauty of Scripture, big ideas in theology and philosophy, and wisdom for our life today. And we believe God's wisdom is for everyone. So if you find today's conversation helpful, would you click like or subscribe to our channel or drop a review into YouTube or Apple Podcasts? Share with your friends. That will help us reach more people with the truth of God. My name is Ryan. I'm sitting here today with my friend Destiny.
Hey, guys.
And today we're going to talk about the birds and the bees and the Bible. Lately, we've been thinking about the book of Proverbs, which actually has a lot to say about sex and the erotic. And ancient Hebrew culture was actually pretty frank about these things. So oftentimes the translations into English kind of play down what is often very direct in Hebrew, or there's layers of innuendo that are kind of spicy. So today we're going to be looking at the book of Proverbs. What does it say about sex and the erotic? And what does it mean? Does it matter for us today, 3,000 years later, in a very, very different culture? So we're going to talk about all of that and more today. Destiny, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. I'm excited.
Now, you and your husband are involved in youth ministry.
We are.
Do you think about sex at all?
You know, that's a tough
Are
question
they aware
to answer.
these days? Are they aware these days of?
They're extremely aware.
Okay.
But I think you made a good point, considering I think we're all asking the question, not just our teenagers. Why am I expected to listen to advice from 3,000 years ago about sex and the erotic? What is there to be said about it, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think the fundamental answer to that is, do you assume that human nature is stable or is it fluid? Because if human nature is stable across time, then we would expect to find real relevance to something said at any period of time. But if human nature fundamentally changes, then it might be irrelevant.
That's a good point. I think something that I realized too is we often anchor a lot of these conversations to, well, culture's changed, culture's shifted. And actually, it's not an anthropological answer. It's a sociological answer. It's always about, well, what's happening in society and that kind of thing.
Right.
So you kind of rooting it anthropologically is really helpful. And also, you use this term to talk about the erotic eros.
Yeah.
I want you to give us a little bit more of a rounded out understanding of why you use that word in particular, because it's a Greek word.
Yeah.
We're talking about the Hebrew scriptures. How does this all come together in Proverbs?
Yeah. Well, actually, your point ties in, both of your points tie together, because one of the reigning epistemological frameworks of the last century
Take a moment real quick.
Yep.
Epistemological.
Epistemology means it's that branch of philosophy that thinks about the nature of knowledge.
Okay.
What is knowledge? Can we ever achieve knowledge?
How do you know
How
something?
would we do it? How would
Okay.
I know that I know something? What are different types of knowledge? And so one of the dominant epistemological theories of the last very long while has been the social construction of knowledge. So whatever we may think is knowledge is the rules are dictated by the larger society we find ourselves in. So the society is prior to the individual. The scope of what is even thinkable for me as an individual is predetermined by the society in which I find myself. Gotcha. And that leads to your second point, which is, wait a minute, if we're studying ancient Hebrew literature, why use a word from Greek? It's common to point out, you'll hear this in church sometime, that there's like 4 different types of love in Greek, or this is pointed out in different ways. C.S. Lewis has a great book on this, by the way. I just brought it. I love this book. It's called The Four Loves.
The Four Loves.
An exploration of the nature of love. And it breaks it down into, well, there's certain types of love that are like affection. Like I got affection for my dog or for my quirky neighbor. Or like, you know, it's not like we're BFFs, but I kind of like that old geezer.
Sure.
I got affection for my car. Her name's Anastasia. I have affection for these things. Yeah. But then, and the word there in Greek is storge. But then there's friendship love, which is like phileo. It's like your BFF. It's not sexual, but it's a deep love.
Yep.
Then there is a realm, there's the word eros, which outside of the idea of sex, like bodies attracted to each other, it's the larger concept of desire. This deep, visceral pull. That is what it's getting at. And so sex is sort of a subset of that. And then there's the fourth, which has been huge for Christianity. It's agape, which is like charity. Agape is that which celebrates the being of the other for its own sake. I don't get anything out of you.
Mhm.
I just celebrate that you exist.
Mm.
And I want to serve you without getting any kickback.
Mhm.
And so agape has been really, really central Christian category.
Mhm.
So I use that word eros to point out that there's a realm bigger than sex. Sex is part of it, and it's really key to the book of Proverbs, because the
Mhm.
book of Proverbs at its core, the Bible in many ways, is trying to educate our desire.
Yeah. So that's where it maps on.
Yes.
Eros has in its core of what it's trying to describe, what it's trying to get at, is desire.
Mhm.
And desire broadly is something that, and we'll talk more about this, you don't just access it. I mean, we can identify it sometimes.
Yes.
We're not always super aware of what desires are driving us.
Yes.
But Proverbs maps on to Eros in the sense that it's really trying to shape and talk through what it
Mhm.
looks like to shape a human person's desire
Right.
toward God and toward things that are in the best interest of our human flourishing. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You said something that's very important, that we're often not aware of it. So we know this from current brain studies that a great deal of our cognition and our decisions are so far layers below what we're aware of.
Mm.
And you'll hear people talk about like the reptile brain, like deep in your brainstem, there's like fundamental urges to say, like, do I approach or avoid something? Is that something that I should move closer to or that I should run away from?
Mm-hmm.
And Proverbs is trying to dial in that faculty, because if you, for example, a great example is like choosing your influences.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to say, boy, I'm going to go hang out with those gangsters who are stealing and doing all this bad stuff, but they think they're super cool and going to get away with it? If I'm attracted to that and act on that attraction, I'm going to put myself in a bad way.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if there are wise voices in my life, people who've been there, done that, and are actually, they're wealthy, they're healthy, they're joyous, their families are intact, they've got a good business, like they're doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
I need to, my desire should be to listen to them, to go to them. But here's the thing, and you mentioned this, precisely because desire is below our level of awareness, it's like your gut instinct.
Yeah.
You don't even choose it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then how do you train it? And the way is, you don't train it by frontal assault. The quickest way to make a kid want ice cream is say, you can't have ice cream. But I want ice cream now.
Yep. Yeah.
So you have to
Absolutely.
sneak up on it from the side. There's this great quote from this Bible scholar. His name's Michael Fox, not the Back to the Future guy. And what's the name of that cool car, the Mandalorian or something? Anyways, did you ever see that movie, Back to the Future?
Yeah, I did. But
Your
I
husband would
think,
be like riffing wildly
oh
right
no,
now,
totally,
I'm sure.
he would be. Yeah, I've seen it once, and then Mandalorian is
that
something totally different. Yeah.
But what's the name of the car in Back to the Future?
Oh, dude, I'm sorry. I don't
Okay.
know. I'm gonna get. This is like totally not building me any street cred right now.
Okay, you know what?
Yeah, sorry.
I suck at that game too.
Yeah.
Have you seen that movie game?
Yes, I have.
I suck at
Yeah.
that game. Okay, anyways, back to the distinguished regions of biblical scholarship.
Michael Fox,
One
he had
Michael
something cool to
Fox
say.
at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He says, wisdom, he's a commentator on the book of Proverbs, wisdom has an emotional as well as an intellectual component. That's why the son is urged not only to learn wisdom, but to love and desire it.
Hmm.
Wisdom is a configuration of the soul. That's deep, man. Wisdom is a configuration of the soul. It is moral character. And fostering moral character, it's no overstatement to say, is at all times the greatest goal of education. It's also the greatest challenge. For moral character comes down to desiring the right things. And how can we teach desire?
You know, this brings up an interesting thought. The fact that Lady Wisdom is Lady Wisdom personified
Oh, yeah.
in the book of Proverbs
Oh,
is
yeah.
just kind of genius.
Oh, exactly.
Because when we interact with human persons, we understand what it means to both intellectually interact, right,
Mhm.
and exchange knowledge, but also to love and care for and invite and be hospitable to.
Mhm.
And so we almost have this opportunity and this call to do the same with Lady Wisdom.
Oh, yeah.
And say, come into my house. I want to hear from you.
Oh, yeah.
Be somewhere in Proverbs, I think it's somewhere between chapter 5 and 7, talks about like make her like your sister, like
Yeah.
your closest friend.
Yeah.
And so I see this mapping onto that so well. And the genius of training desire through a lens and a picture of something that you can befriend, something that
Yeah.
you can make near and dear to you.
Yeah. And it also uses like sexual language for Proverbs. It says like grasp onto her, and it's using a term that's often used in sexual context.
Interesting.
So it's
Okay.
like, especially for a young male listener, it's like, this is a marriage type relationship. This is a lifelong companion that
Okay.
will do you good, not harm all the days of your life. And
Okay. Wow.
but the author knows that you sneak up on desire through stories, through surprises. You spring you lay a rhetorical trap, and then you spring the trap. And like
But
Proverbs,
we like that, right? We
Oh,
prefer
yeah.
that because
That's
I
how
just
you learn.
imagine for, I think about even the students that we counsel and talk with, my husband and I, all the time. And 9 times out of 10, they don't want to just be obstinate, but they're tired of hearing their parents go, do this, don't do that.
Right.
And they're like, but I'm a thinking person. I just want you to hear me out and blah, blah, blah. And they may still be wrong
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
where their desires are going to lead them. But there's this desire to be wooed and to be understood and to be accessed in a way that's more engaging versus just a simple do and don't. Because they know these desires are pretty heavy.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we know these desires are pretty heavy. So a simple do and don't isn't going to cut it for the human heart
Yep.
and all of its complexities.
Not only the heart, but the hormones
Yes.
and all that, which
Exactly.
that's Spanish for hormones.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
No, I heard this one story once. This is a great story. So it's a story about these junior high girls who have discovered lipstick,
Okay.
and every day they go to the bathroom and they practice their smooch on the glass, and they're
Okay.
and they're very
Yeah.
excited about it. But the janitor sees them doing that, and he says, "Oh, girls, I wouldn't do that." They're like, "Why? We're having so much fun. This is great." And he goes, "Well, let me show you how I clean that mirror every day."
Oh no.
And so he grabs his mop and puts it in the toilet, and then he
No.
cleans the glass. And all of a sudden, the girls were persuaded that kissing that toilet water every day was not so great. And this is
Suddenly it lost
but
its
that's
charm.
an example of how Proverbs will tell you a
Yeah.
story, and it will make you see what I think I want is actually not what I want if I could only see what's really going on here. And this is like Proverbs
perfect picture.
Proverbs chapter
Yeah.
7. There's this story I looked out the window and there was this young man lacking sense, and it was at the end of the day, and he was walking in her corner, where that lady lives, and she came out to him, and blah 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 blah. They end up in bed all night, and then the end of the story is, and he went to his death not realizing it. All at once, the trap sprung on him. What he thought he wanted actually ended up to his death. And that's the same sort of story structure
Yep.
as the junior high girls in the bathroom.
Yep.
But that's how desire is educated,
Mhm.
through stories that suck you in, and then they snap reality into a different framework that
That's good.
makes you say,
Yep.
geez, what's my reality?
And maybe we can touch on this later, but Jesus actually does that.
Oh,
Quite a
Jesus is the
bit.
master
He's
of that.
really good at that.
Oh, yeah.
I want to get better at that because it's so true. Maybe that's even a good note on parenting, like just finding ways to be good storytellers,
Yeah.
that we still find a way to get that nugget in there that we want our child to understand.
Yeah.
But
We did an episode some time
yeah.
ago called Jesus as the Brain Whisperer.
yes.
Why he told
Yeah,
stories.
go watch that, guys.
And
Yeah.
that gets to the core of his teaching style. Like he's not just a folksy storyteller. He's super. I mean, in the ultimate analysis, he made the brain.
Yep.
And he also made sex.
Mhm.
And so the way in which the Bible is counseling us is relevant for today. And let's get back to
Good.
Proverbs for a second.
Yeah.
But actually, one last thing about Jesus. This gets fundamentally to how we learn about sex or anything else. We're not ready to learn anything until we want to learn it. Until we're ready to learn it. That's what Jesus would often wait till anybody asked him a question. He wouldn't just show up and start holding forth to people very often. He would wait until somebody asked a question, because that signals a desire to learn. And So proverb makes you want it. There's a book called Unapologetic by this is this hilarious, snarky British guy who's like a Christian against his own will. It's called Unapologetic. The subtitle is
Nice.
Why the Gospel Still Makes Emotional Sense.
Hmm.
And Tim Keller used this a lot. The basic idea is to say, you got to get people to the point where they want something to be true before they're willing to learn whether or not it is true. It's like, geez, wouldn't it be cool if we lived in such a world where the gospel were true? I mean, I know it's probably not true, but wouldn't it be great if the world did work that way?
Mm-hmm.
And getting them to that plane where they want it.
Well, this goes back to another episode that you did with Dr. Paul Long on the right and left brain, and how we don't realize so much of belief and the core of what deeply shapes us is the storied part of our brain and the part that interacts with art and beauty. And, we've kind of flattened out what those things can communicate as if they can't be vehicles of truth. And God's designed them to be wonderful vehicles of truth. And so I think it's very fitting that all of these things are converging here in Proverbs. And
one of the themes in Proverbs and in the Bible writ large that I find very, very relevant to me, because I'm not a new Christian. I'm trying to be a Christian for the long haul. And so some of the stuff that was like super revolutionary to me, like in my teens or 20s, it's like, nah. Yeah. I mean, that's great, but I am actually looking for something a little more substantive, hence deeper.
Yeah.
But there's this verse, I think it's in Corinthians, that says like, and this is a theme through all the stories of the Bible, but Paul distills it. He says, let the one who thinks he stands beware, lest he fall. Because it's just after the high water mark where you're just like, boom, I just nailed it. I'm having this great God moment. The snake is in the grass, like your next step. Be careful. And so why that's relevant to what we're studying today is the book of Proverbs is framed as the writings of Solomon. Solomon gives his sons wisdom about using the sexual part of our life properly for our flourishing, not for our destruction. And yet Solomon himself is affiliated throughout the Bible with the erotic, with the dimension of sex gone awry and sex gone wild in a certain way. And I'll say what I mean by that in a second. And so what that shows me is that even somebody who could articulate this wisdom was not himself immune from the pull of using sex in the wrong way. So, obviously Solomon is the son of Bathsheba, whom David had, he slept with
a
and
murderous
stole.
affair with.
Yeah, no big deal. But he's the son of Bathsheba. And also he's traditionally the author of the Song of Solomon, the Song of Songs. This, the Bible's one great erotic love poem. And 1 Kings chapter 11 tells us this. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, Hittite women from the nations concerning which the Lord said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. And he starts worshiping other gods. And so he's a cautionary tale. It doesn't mean that the wisdom of the book of Proverbs is invalid. It just means, especially for us as a Christian, that our ultimate referent is that one greater than Solomon is here. And that's Jesus. And so it doesn't undermine what Solomon's saying, but again, it's just that word from 1 Corinthians. Let the one who thinks he stands beware, lest he fall. And that's the kind of, I think, truth that helps you make it the long run as a Christian.
Absolutely. And practically speaking, asking ourselves very intentional questions that begin to drill down and help us drill down on what desire means, what desires we have.
Yep.
What do I love? How do I know that I love that thing or that person?
Maybe a question would be, if something were taken away from me, what taken away from me would make me just desperate and wild? Like, what's that thing that if it were removed, I would be undone? Because that identifies for you a little bit of like where your hopes are invested, where your identity is invested, what you're ultimately loyal to.
Yes.
You know?
That's an absolutely a great picture to use. I'm just trying to understand too how Proverbs treats sex broadly,
Mm-hmm.
because there's the layer of desire, and then there's just how to do the thing properly.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
how to live well and dial in your life towards true human flourishing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And a lot of people say that Proverbs gives us a means to see that picture.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What is the picture that it's painting?
Yeah. So, there's this idea, I think it's in some like Star Wars movie or something like, my son, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yes.
Or something like that.
Yep.
I don't know. You movie buffs will know more than me where that comes. I don't know where it comes
I'm
from.
sorry, we're terrible. We'll
Yeah,
get better.
But I like to pretend. But the basic idea is that sex falls into that category.
Mm-hmm.
It is great power. Therefore, there's great responsibility. It's like fire.
Yes. Yep.
It's a classic example. Fire can warm up a room. It can bring light.
Mm-hmm.
You can cook and do all sorts of useful things with fire.
Yeah.
But if you use it wrong, it's gonna destroy you. And Proverbs, explicitly says this in Proverbs chapter 6.
Mm-hmm.
I think I just wrote it down here. It says, "Can a man carry fire next to his chest and his clothes not be burned? Can one walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched? So is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. None who touches her will go unpunished." And what's interesting in the book of Proverbs is that if you ask, the common question, like, it feels so good, so why can it be wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And Proverbs, its case of why you shouldn't do this is pretty pragmatic, actually. It's basically like, well, it's going to be expensive. Prostitutes are not cheap. You're going to waste a ton of money on pursuing sexual adventures. It's not the answer you think the Bible would give, like, God is offended. It's actually like, no, the math doesn't work. You're going to like totally wreck.
No, that's a great point.
You're going to wreck your finances.
But that's what we're expecting to hear. That's what anybody who has known a Christian or met with a pastor or whatever, like it's always the behavioral modification note first. Like, just don't do it because you're going to make God mad, or because,
right.
He's got the wagging finger, going, you shouldn't have done that.
No, the pornography industry is mass, and it rakes in billions and billions of dollars. How do you think they make it? This stuff, there's a free level, but then there's a non-free level, and the free level is meant to get you to pay. It's a business, and it is. People waste a lot of money on that, and that's a new thing where you can do that in your own house. But like paying for illicit sex, the Bible says, and it's very, very true, is expensive. Secondly, it's relationally costly.
Yes.
It says, like, look, there's this passage that says, if you sleep with another guy's wife, he's not going to accept your apology. There's going to be no world in which he's like, it's okay. Like,
let bygones be bygones.
Like,
yeah.
And, of course, people today are like open marriages and all that stuff. But it's interesting how unsatisfying that is reported to be oftentimes. And people are like, why am I still jealous? Why am I still jealous? It's like, because you're a human being. Hello. But so it's relationally costly. Yeah. And it also just, it consumes your time and your energy and your effect. Like it can become this monster. Proverbs 31, which we talked about last time, starts out by saying, my son, don't give the Hebrew word is chel, which is like, it can mean your wealth, but also your power, your pith, your juice,
like human resource.
Yeah, like you're sort of like your inner drive. Don't give that away. You're to illicit sexual partners. That's not a good idea. So what's interesting about Proverbs is that it's pragmatic in its case of why not do this, whereas the Bible writ large is more like, well, we have a high view of the body. The body's not your playground to do with whatever you want. Your body's a temple. Your body is the place where heaven and earth overlap. When you use sex to procreate, you are actually co-creating with God. You are putting into play new reality. It's like a very deep existential thing. And other places in the Bible talks about how your mind is brought into sexuality. Like there's a lot of ways to explore this. But what I find interesting is Proverbs is pretty like pragmatic. It's just like save your money, save your reputation, don't overly complicate your life. The other thing too, and I love this so much about the Bible, is that it is aware of things that are mysterious in the world. And so there's this great passage in Proverbs 30. The Bible often has, we talk in deeper a lot about literary design in the Bible. and how the structure is often a vehicle for the message.
Right.
And one of the things that ancient Hebrew authors love to do is structure things in a pattern of 1, 2, 3, plus 1.
Okay.
It's almost like a joke.
Mhm.
You know, a rabbi and a hooker and a priest walk into a bar, and then in came the. It's almost like a joke style, but
Interesting.
the fourth element, the
Mhm.
plus 1, is often where the twist, the surprise, the important thing comes.
Mhm.
So that's the background for this. Proverbs 30, verses 18 through 20 says this: 3 things are too wonderful for me. 4 I do not understand. Like, I don't get it. This is a mystery.
Okay.
The way of an eagle in the sky, the way of a serpent on a rock, the way of a ship on the high seas. That's 1, 2, 3. Here's point 4. And the way of a man with a virgin. Now, what do those 4 things have in common?
It sounds like absolutely nothing, truthfully. Like, what?
Right.
I
It's
don't
like,
know.
how do you see what? So this is interesting. All 4 of these things have like an undulating motion. The way of an eagle in
I
the
see.
sky,
Mhm.
a snake on the ship in the high seas. And of
So
course,
this is like a very direct innuendo for like
oh yeah,
sexual interaction and
oh
like
totally,
having sex.
totally. It's rhythmic, we might say.
Interesting.
Yeah, and there's another thing that these things have in common. They're all traceless. When they're gone, and you don't even know they were there. An eagle flies through the
Oof.
sky. You
Yeah.
don't even know that the eagle, it didn't leave a trace. The snake on the rock, it left no trail. The ship goes through the sea. It doesn't leave, I mean, it leaves a wake, but it doesn't leave a lingering trail.
Mhm.
And sex, too, has this way of not leaving a trail. And this is where the author then, in his plus 1, the 4th element, expands it. And he says this in verse 20. This is the way of an adulteress. She eats and wipes her mouth. It's traceless and says, I have done no wrong. And so it's getting here to like
Wow.
deeper attitudes about sex,
Mhm.
but it's also using these 4 images
Mhm.
in a way to help you think more deeply about the way that sexuality maps onto other things in the world.
Interesting. I mean, this is truthfully like this is so ironic because in our culture, I mean, we could beat the drum all day long. We just always talk about how sex is everywhere, it's in your face, right? And yet at the same time, hearing something like that from the Bible would make somebody just kind of go, "Oh, that recoil," knowing that that's what it means.
Solomon.
Getting pretty, yeah. Excuse me, yeah, like, but in a way, like I'm even sitting here like I wouldn't quite define that as crude. It's just oddly straightforward, and I'm not used to that.
I
Usually,
actually think
I'm
that's
used to
profound.
I'm
Like-
used to crude, in your face, like gross jokes
Right.
that really don't have any.
Right.
They drain sex of its
Yes,
dignity and its
yes,
humanity,
Yes.
and they're just gross, But when it comes to something that somehow maintains that, but then there's comparisons to the world around us, and you realize it's very deep, but you're also like, I'm kind of uncomfortable, Like this is important, I think, for us to accept about the Bible, because the Bible is more willing to be in the trenches about sex, I think, than we are sometimes. We're willing to engage on such a superficial level. And the Bible's like, you want to go talk about sex? We're going to talk about sex.
Right.
And we're
But
going
it
to do
doesn't
it.
vulgarize it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying is like there's still the dignity and the humanity and the beauty of what God created while also being very clear about the nature of the thing.
Yeah. And there's other innuendos that are often like brushed aside
Mm-hmm.
in English. Like, for example, Proverbs 5 likens female genitalia to a well, sort of a moist tube, basically. And it says, let your well be yours alone. Let it not run around in the streets. Let it, and enjoy it. Make it, but it's building that as a metaphor. On the male side, often the word in Hebrew for foot, which is regel, it's actually the word for foot and leg. Regel. Is often, it can be a metaphor for male genitalia. So, like, for example, in the book of Ruth, and
right.
Ruth lay down at his feet, and she uncovered his feet, and she laid there all night.
Yeah, and all of us Americans are like,
yeah, why would
why?
you do that? That's the weirdest. Does she have
feet are probably gross.
Does she have a foot fetish?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, no, it's
Yeah.
in Hebrew. You're like, oh, but you have to
Ah.
understand how that story maps onto the story in Genesis 19 and Lot and his daughters who father the Moabites, and Ruth's a
Right.
Moabitess, and the way in which actually what Ruth is saying is like it's walking you right up to the edge of failure, and they don't fail. They do everything right.
Mm.
But it's using those subtle innuendos to cue you in to the stakes.
Yeah.
And this is, the Bible's a book for adults.
Mm-hmm.
Adults think about sex. And so it's a bummer when some of those elements that would make the Bible a little bit more relevant to our lives are kind of brushed aside as like, oh, that's not very proper.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of innuendos and frankness. Like, I mean, when the Bible talks about sex, it basically just says, and he went into her.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty straightforward.
Or he knew her.
That's a deep dimension
mm-hmm.
where sex and in marriage, the sort of knowledge that's created through loving union is a very, very deep topic. And St. Paul thought a lot about this too. He thought a lot, as academics say, at the intersection of love and knowledge. Those are two of the greatest mysteries of all. And the Hebrew, the fact that Hebrew uses the word yada, which is the root for to know, as and Adam knew his wife Eve, is a profound thing. And in English, there's a funny joke here because you can, the word is yada, but you can also just say yada, yada, yada. And so when you're like, want to say what they did, they went over there and they yada, yada, yada. And
yeah.
Okay.
No, I think to map back onto Proverbs and speak about the avenues of human flourishing and how the Bible is just really open to engaging in how this all works and what it's like. But then it also shifts its attention oftentimes to how this goes wrong.
Yeah.
And I know that sometimes we use words that just feel a little bit inaccessible, like fornication, or, sometimes even sex outside of marriage can feel like clear about like where the sex is happening, but not quite drilling down on like why it's wrong.
Right.
And so there's a lot of like biblical words around this.
Yeah.
And Proverbs addresses a lot of these different types of uses of sexuality that are kind of outside of God's design for us. But I'm just curious to know, like, especially with like the adulterous woman in Proverbs and
adulterous men, we should say too.
Yes.
Like it's not.
Sorry, I'm talking
Proverbs,
about
Proverbs is using examples and specifics that it expects you to infer from to comparable things. So it's not bad women, stay away. It's saying all humans have this liability in endless variations. So I just want to throw that in there.
Thank you. Yeah, to be specific, Proverbs chapter 7 uses this picture of an adulterous woman and a young man who are kind of in an interactive story together. And it's basically, the story's telling us, you don't want to be either of these people.
Yeah.
But essentially, I think my question is just asking, like, what does fornication mean? What does
lust?
How does lust play a factor into all of that? And adultery, I think Proverbs kind of brings all these together into conversation.
Yeah. And you'll hear this sometimes, sort of the idea of, and I mean, a lot of Christians today too. It's like, okay, we understand, like, once you get married, sex outside of marriage becomes a different thing than if you were to have sex before you're married.
Sure.
And it's sort of seen as like, but does the Bible really speak to that? Indeed, it does. And, people often say, well, Jesus doesn't talk about it. Yeah, because Jesus took for granted what the Torah said in so many things. And so, for example, the Torah says, right after the Ten Commandments, in fact, in Exodus chapter 22, it says this: if a man seduces a virgin, a young woman of marriageable age, who is not betrothed, and lies with her, he shall give the bride price for her and make her his wife. Now, if it had said, if a man seduces a virgin who is betrothed and lies with her, then you both die. Like, it was actually capital punishment. Like, adultery was taken. Like, when you break the marriage covenant, that was like bad. But what happens if you sleep with somebody who's not committed? Well, congratulations, you just married her. That's what it's saying. It's saying that when that union is made, whether we like it or not, it is real and it's final. And then it says, if the father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money equal to the bride price for virgins. But the point is to say, it doesn't use the word fornication, but that is what that is. And it's saying that should lead to marriage, and right away. So it's so the Bible's pretty clear that, you know, the only context for sexual expression is marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And when two lives come together in marriage, there's so many dimensions of lives coming. You're coming together financially. You're coming
Right.
together with your respective career paths and family dreams. You're
Yep.
bringing two whole tribes together.
Mm-hmm.
You're merging bank accounts.
Mm-hmm.
You're merging emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And when you merge bodies, that should be sort of the there shouldn't be an asymmetry where you're merging bodies, but you're not merging any of that other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because essentially what you're doing then, love makes you want to say crazy things. I'm going to love you forever. This is the best. You
Mm-hmm.
speak in the superlative. It makes you want to do
Right.
crazy, infinite things. But when you have sex without that commitment, you're basically committing an act of eternity with your fingers behind your back crossed. And you're like, I kind of don't mean it. I do want to preserve an out just in case
Mm-hmm.
someone better, but more sparkly comes along, just in
Mhm.
case it just doesn't work out. But what you're ultimately hurting yourself and you're hurting this other person. There's all sorts of data that the people who over the span of a lifetime have the most sex and the best sex are married people.
Mm-hmm.
Your frumpy middle-aged people are having a wonderful old time married.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you play the field and you sort of embrace sexual freedom, so-called, you are setting yourself up for a sexless life long term. Because someday you're going to be mid-40s and gravity's going to take over. You ain't going to be so hot.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to be in your mid-50s and in your mid-60s. And you are actually statistically setting yourself up for a less sexually joyous life. And so the Bible has our best in mind. By the way, there's all sorts of data, too, coming out from all sorts of groups about why marriage, because marriage has come under massive assault. It's a cultural institution. It's a relic of the patriarchy. It's
Right,
terrible
right.
for everybody.
Yep.
We don't need it. Well, turns out that married people statistically live longer, live healthier, are wealthier, report higher satisfaction,
Mm-hmm.
advance further in their careers.
Mm-hmm.
There's all sorts of metrics.
And this is not just Christianized data.
No.
This
In
is-
fact, yeah,
there's secular voices
yeah.
making good contributions to this conversation.
I brought a book here from, I haven't fully read it, so disclaimer, but her name is Louise Perry. She's a feminist writer, and it's called The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, a new guide to sex in the 21st century. And her background, I understand, is as a journalist covering cases of rough sex gone wrong. So where people they consented, and yet someone died or got incredibly hurt. And she's basically saying wow, the gospel of sexual freedom is hurting a lot of people. Consent is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And her final chapter is called Marriage is Good. And her conclusion is called Listen to Your Mother.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, so this is an example of a voice that's not committed to the Bible in any way, but through other paths has reached the conclusion that kind of just doing whatever you want hurts a lot of people.
I was actually listening to something that Louise Perry, a podcast where she was sharing her thoughts, and she mentioned, she said, look, I'm not a Christian, but I find myself sympathetic to a lot of Christian ideas because of all the data and all of my exposure to sexual violence, all this stuff that she has in her career seen and understood.
Yep.
And she was basically saying, look, if you guys can come up with a better alternative, I'm happy to listen.
Right.
Alternative to marriage, meaning. But she said, truthfully, we also have to recognize sometimes that simply because something doesn't work sometimes doesn't mean that it doesn't work at all.
Exactly.
And so
Yep.
we've really just thrown the baby out with the bathwater, saying marriage just doesn't work. To hell with it,
Right.
But we've found no better alternative, and we've ignored thousands of years of history,
Right.
where we see evidence when it is done healthily, it actually helps the most people flourish the
Yeah.
most ways.
To say nothing about children. The statistics about life outcomes for kids who grow up in
absolutely.
two-parent stable families versus kids who grow up in any number of other configurations are pretty drastic.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the gospel substructure of it. When you enter into a sexual relationship, which is wonderful, life becomes less about you.
Mm-hmm.
Because if this union is going to produce children, which it naturally does. And especially, we were very aware of this before birth control and other
Right.
things came on the scene, and that radically changed sexual ethics.
Yep.
But you are open to the possibility now that the center of gravity in your life is different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because God teaches us that the way up is down. The way to become is to empty. It's a good thing,
Mm-hmm.
but it sure cuts against the grain of the gospel of autonomy and independence.
Absolutely.
And so I mean, we could do a whole big long series on this, but it's sexuality like gets down to the foundations of who we are in some deep ways.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the adjacent topic as well of gender and so forth. Like these are not just sort of like interesting things to ponder. They get to the core of what we are.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why disagreement around them are often so fierce and so
Personal.
Deeply personal. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We didn't circle back to this one term, lust.
Yes.
I want to talk about this for just a second because sexuality is also an issue. And, Jesus says, just ground this in the Bible, Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, you've heard that it said, don't commit adultery. But I tell you, whoever looks at a woman with lustful intent, I'm quoting the ESV,
Mm-hmm.
has already committed adultery with her in his heart. What does that mean, lustful intent? Lust is an entryway into the reality that sexuality is both physical and spiritual. It's not just raw physicality.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just raw spirituality either. And so I've heard it described, this is a helpful way for me to think about it, that lust is like a spiritual dimension that can be overlaid atop the natural physical desire. Sex is a natural physical desire.
Mm-hmm.
Lust is an attitude that wants to make that desire serve unnatural ends.
Mm.
Very often, for some people, it can become like a coping, for people like porn addicts and
Sure.
stuff, it can become a coping mechanism as a way to escape undesirable things in life, stress, disappointment, shame,
Right.
whatever.
Sure.
But lust wants to own what is not its own.
Its own.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it wants to take. And in the New Testament, it often, it'll use the word porneia, which is kind of a catch-all term in Greek for sexual sin of a variety of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
But then it will say, by the way, that's idolatry. You're like, what's the connection?
Yeah.
It can become a form of worship, a form of false worship. And we always know an idol because they demand more and more and more of you. And they make you less and less human.
Yeah.
And
That's a
so
great point.
lust becomes this way of bending, of twisting what is naturally good, but it is a spiritual disposition. Like, for example, I have a book here too. This is a book without a cover, actually. This is from a group called Sex Addicts Anonymous or Sexaholics Anonymous. And it goes deep into the sort of the structure of lust. And it keys off of like Alcoholics Anonymous.
Sure.
And various 12-step addiction programs. And the basic idea is that these addiction problems are spiritual at their core. And if we don't address the spiritual, we will not be healed.
Mm.
And so, whether it's overeating or alcoholism or drugs or sex or any other number of addictive, the structure of addiction is spiritual. And so Jesus is, and it puts a screen of fantasy between you and the real world. And so Jesus is saying, like, don't isolate yourself from reality through fantasy, through
imagination.
Yes. It's a complex, potent topic, but I think it's really important that we understand it because it helps us understand our own humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways,
it's helpful understanding it in layers as well, because they're between the physical components and then the maybe immaterial component of how sexuality is expressed and how our desires live in our actions, like all of those things happening at once. It's not always easy to just, kind of parse it all out. It all just feels kind of like this wave of desire that we're
those
somehow
hormones
trying to guide.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that both the book of Proverbs and the Bible as a whole act as a guiding force, understanding how humans actually work.
Yeah.
Thank the Lord.
Yeah.
And can approach us with not just a do and a don't, but I'm going to access the imagination. I'm going to access the deepest parts of your desires, the reordering of your life. Like we are embraced by, our whole person is embraced by the work of God through the power of the Holy Spirit, through the scriptures, and we are shaped and guided.
Yeah. In one stream of tradition, one stream of Christian thought that's influenced by St. Augustine, which is a very big tradition, or the stream of Christian thought. The Christian faith in many ways is all about desire and desiring God above all things. I mean, I think that's John Piper's organization.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
Desiring God. The basic idea is God is a, what's the word of people who love pleasure?
Oh, hedonistic?
God is a hedonist. Yeah, basically, God.
Sure, I've
God
heard that.
is not anti-pleasure. It's about having God at the top of your pleasures. There's this great phrase I've heard somewhere, like the expulsive power of a new affection. So you got something in your life, some bad habit, you're like, I like that thing and I can't seem to get away from it. The best thing to do is not to say, don't. It's to bring something into your life that you want more.
Yes.
And Christian maturity is about wanting God above all and the expulsive power of a new affection. And I think that's
really good.
And but Proverbs gives us some practical things to do in terms of avoiding. I just want to run by a couple of those. One of the things I like about the shape of the book of Proverbs, and by that I mean the literary design, right up front in the early chapters, it tells the imaginary young listener, wait, don't let sex burn your life down. And it says this repetitively. This is the Bible's way of like underlining emojis, like pay attention, this is super important.
Yeah.
Don't burn your life. It's right up front. Then, starting in chapter 10, it goes into all sorts of other topics, money and words and how to be an employer, an employee, or how to be a good judge, or it goes into all sorts of topics. It's a curriculum about everything. And then at the end of the book, it brings back up the issue about finding the right spouse. And it's almost, to me, it says like in the arc of a life, as you're a young person heading out into the world, there's innumerable ways for sex to complicate your life before it even begins. And you got to pass that test. Then learn about the world. Learn how to be a balanced, fruitful adult. Then, in the right time, there will be a marriageable partner brought by God into your life. And that certainly was true for me, like part of my experience. And so I don't think that structure's accidental. So like, I guess the first thing is trust the system, trust the process, let God be your tutor. But then Proverbs has some really practical stuff. Proverbs 4 talks about guarding your heart above everything, the core of your personality, because everything flows out of that. So you've got to guard those core fantasies, those core movies you're playing, those core dreams, those core
scripts.
Yeah, future versions of you, past versions of you. Guard that.
Yep.
Proverbs 5 talks about contentment. Enjoy what God has put in your life. Why did after Solomon had 600 princesses and 200 concubines, why 100 more of both? Clearly the guy had a contentment problem. I mean, at what point is enough enough? Unless you have contentment, enough is never enough.
Right.
And that applies sexually as well. Proverbs 7, be intentional. That is to say, be where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. Don't be in the wrong place at the wrong. Don't set yourself up in a situation that is unwinnable. People are like, why do I keep doing this? Well, it started when you started movies at 11:30 on your basement couch, just the two of you. Just a thought that might lead to a situation where,
absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
And then ask God to train you to help you want Him more than other things. Again, what I love about the Bible is, contrary to what many have said about the Bible has a very positive view of sexuality. The Bible's not a downer about this. The Bible is not skittish or prudish or weird or controlling. It's a good part of life. And God is saying, this is a fire. Now I do want you to not destroy yourself. Learn how to use it. It's good. And so that positive vision, I think, is very, very important to keep central.
I think about a time when I went camping with my, at the time, 2-year-old daughter, 1-year-old son, and my husband. My husband, Montanan, full
Come on.
outdoorsman.
I'm from Montana too.
And mind you, I'm coming from California, so I'm skittish about everything, right? I'm trying to pretend like I'm not. And he's starting a fire. And I was kind of letting the kids play around. And he looks at me and he goes, Destiny, we need to sit them down and we need to talk to them about what's appropriate around this fire and what's not. And so he pulled each of them aside. And I'm over here like, I don't know what to say. Don't go near the fire, hold them back or whatever. But he really just, the tone of his voice carried the weight of what it meant to be near fire. And I think of that as, I couldn't be upset at all because I was being tutored in the reality of what this thing could do. It was going to be great. We were going to have s'mores and we were going to enjoy tacos, walking tacos and all that stuff, and the warmth and cuddling our kids around the fire. But if my son fell in there just out of curiosity, my life would be in shambles.
Right.
And so much the same way, the scriptures are not ever going to back down. God is not ever going to back down from helping us understand the thing for what it is, while also presenting the joy that it can provide.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That came to mind when.
That's good stuff. Let's end there.
I love that. Well, guys, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for engaging with Deeper. And guys, we really, like Ryan said in the beginning, we believe that wisdom is for God's wisdom specifically is for everyone. And so we would really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed to our channel, if you shared a review on Apple Podcasts, or you decided to even share a podcast with your friends. We'd love it if you sent a link. But we're really excited for all that God's doing through the Deeper podcast and also doing through the Bay Church.
Yeah, so we're based in the Bay Church. It's a church in the Bay Area, California, and we'd love to see you sometime. We are, you can find us online, thebay.church, and you could come in person or join us for an online service. But hope you're well, and in the meantime, till we see you again, as the rabbis say, shalom, homies. Take care. Bye-bye.